I think the next year or two, we're going to completely shift the way software is written for the last 30 or 40 years. Different programming languages, different tools, but at the end of the day, people have still been writing this stuff by hand. The tools have gotten a little bit better, but there's been no massive step function increase in productivity since the first programming languages came out. And now all of a sudden that is getting flipped on its head, and the entire way we build software and products and ship features and roadmaps is just kind of thrown up in the air, and everyone's trying to figure it out all at the same time.
Welcome to Inspired. I'm Alexa Von Tobel. 90% of the software that we use all day, every day, is open source, built by strangers on the internet, and most companies have no idea if the code they're running on is actually safe. Dan Lorenc is on a mission to change that. He's the founder and CEO of Chainguard, valued at over $3.5 billion. Chainguard cleans, secures, and rebuilds open source code so that more than 600 companies and counting can trust what they're running on. In this conversation, we'll talk about why software security has never been more urgent, how Chainguard is becoming the most trusted layer for every company that runs on code, how AGI is actually in some ways already here, and what changes when writing code is no longer the bottleneck and our ideas are. Let's dive right in. If you're running a startup, we know things like managing equity and communicating with investors are always top of mind. Carta has built a connected suite of tools that over 40,000 companies use to do just that. Their platform of software and services helps you lay the groundwork so you can focus on building. To learn more or get started, visit carta.com. And with that, I'm really excited to welcome Dan. Dan, first of all, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to get to spend some time with you. And additionally, just really excited that you're here in New York City.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm thrilled. All right, Dan, I want to start from the beginning. I always like to ask, especially founders who have built multi-billion-dollar companies. You've raised $600 million, valued at north of $3.5 billion. In every way, you are a true outlier founder. I want to start with your childhood. And if you had to say one or two things that really stands out that you think has contributed to you being able to be an original thinker, what is it?
Yeah, so I grew up in the 90s, which is crazy to think about how long ago that was. But yeah, the world has changed a lot since then. But my childhood, I was always building things with my hands, was running around outside playing with tools, and my dad and my grandpa's garages that I probably shouldn't have been playing with as a 8 or 9 year old kid. Amazing I didn't lose any fingers or anything in any of that time.
Amen. Thank God for that.
Yeah. Building everything like it was pre-internet, so it was just we would get magazines and find things in those to build, and it was everything from potato cannons to race cars to go-karts. And when you're figuring all that stuff out on your own, and you get to kind of see the result of doing that with your hands and putting things together and getting to use them and falling off and getting hurt and doing it again, I think it's a different kind of experience, I think, than a lot of kids have today, with social media and all of that stuff, where you don't see that anymore. People are more scared of that.
I think that's exactly right. Um, if you were to think about like what has given you comfort to take risk, what would that be? Obviously you spent time at MIT studying mechanical engineering. You spent a decade at Google working on infrastructure and open source, which obviously gives you a lot of sort of background for this. But where do you think that comfort with like branching out on your own really came from?
Yeah, I think it's just being willing to try something you haven't done before, and that got to do a lot of that in college. I switch careers too, right? My background was actually mechanical engineering at MIT. Kind of halfway through that, I took my first programming class, and we had to learn MATLAB to do simulations and that kind of thing. And I thought I hated programming before this, but I'd never really done it. And I realized it was actually not as bad as I thought it was going to be, and it was a lot faster. You could create things on your laptop in a dorm room instead of having to get time in the machine shop and order parts and wait for those to show up and screw up and then have to reorder more parts. It kind of condenses that cycle of weeks and weeks to actually get something built to hours, and there's kind of no limit there.
That's awesome. So you enjoyed the speed.
Yeah.
Well, so let's go back to 2021 when you started Chain Guard. What was the aha moment? Obviously, as I said, you'd spent almost a decade at Google. You had really been deep in open source. Um, where did the idea come from?
Yeah, it's a funny story. There was no real idea or plan. I was at Google for a long time. I was doing this open source security stuff for a while. No one really cared about it until the attack on SolarWinds happened, and then all of a sudden, everyone was like, "Oh wow, we have to secure our build systems and our dependencies and all of that too." And so the space started blowing up. And my co-founder Matt, who's our CTO, he left and took a bunch of time off during the pandemic. So I'd worked with him forever at Google, and he just took a break. And I kept trying to get him to come back to work because the whole space was heating up and my team was hiring. And I bugged him every day for 6 months. I was texting him, come back, come back. And one day he finally said he was ready to work again, but how about I quit and we start a company instead of him coming back? And I thought about it for a couple days, put in notice the following Monday, and I knew, yeah, I knew if I thought about it too much, I'd talk myself out of it. But it seemed like a good idea, and we didn't really know what we were going to do when we started. So we got the company started and spent a long time figuring it out. But this space made sense. We tried things in a lot of different spaces, and I think it's sort of a strength. And I talk to a lot of early stage founders. I'm sure you do too. But if you go in with one idea and you have so much conviction in it, that's great because that can give you the confidence to go get started. But you can't also be wedded and tied to that first idea. The chances of that first idea actually being the right one, pretty low. But being willing to try a couple different things, experiment, and then really double down and invest when you're sure that you have the right one. I think it's better in some ways. It's a slower start, but when we had that conviction, we were really ready to go.
Absolutely. I mean, I think being adaptable is like the vital trait of founders where you can follow your nose to where things are working and where value could be created. For everybody out there listening, what is Chainguard in plain English? And maybe for people who are less familiar with it, give us a decent full overview.
Yeah, so we're building a safe source for open source software. Open source software is like 90 to 95% of the software used every day in every application, from the software running inside of an ATM to the software inside of an airplane to the apps on your cell phone. And it's the term open source means it's free. You get the source code. It's written by basically strangers on the internet, and it's just published for anyone to use and do anything they want with. And by the volume, like that's crazy. That 90 to 95% of the code is just free, and people aren't actually writing all of that. But it's amazing. It's why the whole industry is able to move quickly because we can reuse these shared components at the bottom. But in recent years, we've kind of learned the hard side of that, which is that when stuff is maintained by strangers on the internet, not everyone on the internet is nice. If you've spent any time on any social media platform, you've probably noticed that. And you get no guarantees with this. You're not paying for it. There are issues. There are bugs. Some of those bugs lead to security incidents. And then we have nation states like North Korea, Iran, putting bad stuff in there on purpose. So you've got this huge foundation that the whole software industry is built on, and it's under attack in a bunch of different ways. So we're building a safe way for enterprises to get that software that they need without having to worry about the security issues.
Dan, say more, and we'll get into the business model and all of those things. Since, so open source code
Yeah.
that anybody can come use, but Chainguard makes it such that you can trust the code you're getting. And in some ways, just to like use a cooking analogy, it's like Chainguard lets you know that the ingredients that you're going to go use in your food are healthy and organic and safe. Um, that's effectively what Chainguard does. But just give us a sense of how do you create that safety? What does that look like practically?
Yeah, so the trust is the key word here. And there's really two problems when you boil it down. The ingredients one is great, right? There's ingredients in the food. Things can get recalled, and you want to make sure that you're up to date. And if one of these ingredients was bad, then you have a way to fix it and get a fresh one. The other one is the tampering side of it. And so it's kind of like that. Yeah, we do the trusted ingredients and then a tamper-proof seal on it to make sure people haven't put anything bad in it on the way to you. And these supply chains are very long. The term software supply chain is the same as a physical supply chain. It's just much bigger and much more complicated than software.
Say more. What makes it more complicated, actually? And I do like the food analogy
Yeah.
because it's like because of Chainguard, I can trust that the open source code I'm using is safe, secure, tamper-proof, and then you can just go and cook your own meal.
Yeah.
So what makes a software supply chain more complex than maybe a physical supply chain?
Yeah, and maybe more complex isn't quite the word, but complex in a very different way. If there's anybody here that works in physical supply chains, I'm sorry, I don't want to make that sound easy. But one analogy I've heard a couple times, like the bill of materials for like a Boeing airplane is massive, right? I mean, millions of parts in there from hundreds of thousands of different suppliers, that kind of thing. The software, like the bill of materials for one app on your Android phone, is larger than that. It's coming from more people. You don't even know who some of them are at the end of the day. It's just anonymous accounts on social media sites, basically, like GitHub. And so the volume is a lot higher, even for small, simple applications. And then there's a lot less trust involved. Like if you're building an airplane and you buy a bolt, you wrote a check to someone and you know who sold you that bolt. Here, it's just like a picture of a cat and a bunch of random characters on GitHub, right? You don't know who that person is. You can't go call them if anything goes wrong. So a much larger, much more fragmented supply chain without really that trust element at any of the links in here.
Let's talk a little bit about Chainguard today. So you've been up and running for about 5 years. What you've accomplished in a short period of time is really remarkable. But your platform spans 2,000 open source projects. I'm sure that number is even out of date. 100,000 plus libraries and hundreds of thousands of container images, all continuously rebuilt and maintained. First of all, how'd you get that big that quickly? Talk a little bit about literally the accumulation of code.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I love the saying, it's the engineer's credo. We do these things not because they are easy, but because we thought they would be easy when we started. And we didn't know how hard it was going to be. We just started doing it, and the first 10 or 20 projects we did this for really kind of proved out the market demand. Everyone wanted these; they wanted more than we had. As fast as we could possibly add more software packages to this catalog that we sell. And we just sort of stepped back and looked at it. It's a lot of work to do this. It's a lot of work to maintain the software. But the business model itself is classic economies of scale. Everyone at the end of the day is using mostly the same open source. And the old way this worked was every company was doing this kind of same thing themselves for the portion of that open source that they needed. In the beginning, our gross margins were terrible. They were negative. We were losing money on every deal because we had to spend so much time to build and maintain all of this software.
Yep.
But it's just resale of that same software. And so you could kind of draw it out of like the more customers we get, the better our margins get. The cost doesn't go up as we add more and more customers to this. And we can afford to invest even more in automation. And so it sort of builds this flywheel where the business gets better the more we sell and the faster we sell. And then we can afford to invest even more to make the catalog grow faster and maintain it all for cheaper.
Yeah, we always say we like businesses that get bigger, that as they get bigger, they get better.
Yes.
And this is a perfect example of one. Quickly, let's just like give a real life example of what a customer, just like give us an example of a customer, what they come to Chainguard for, what they get, how you safe proof it, and just kind of walk us through a real life example.
Yep. Our customers, I think we have a little over 600 of them now, and they span from 10-person startups to Fortune 5 companies. We're running inside of defense systems, in outer space, kind of in all of these embedded systems too, in places I didn't even know open source was used that prevalently. It's kind of scary at the end of the day how many places the software is deployed. But yeah, at the end of the day, people are used to downloading software from this fragmented collection of ecosystems and hubs and websites that kind of aggregate and store open source. And so when a customer gets it from us, they just kind of do a one-for-one swap. They change the version they were getting to the version they get from us. That could be a container image, a programming language library if you're writing Python or JavaScript or something like that, and swap it out. We go through that software and we patch all of the vulnerabilities that get reported. We fix all of the CVEs that show up in security scanners. And then run that through our secure build system and hand that to our customers. So for the most part, it's just kind of changing out what you were getting with a better version of it.
Okay, Dan, I'm going to ask a really dumb question just because I want everybody out there to actually learn and understand how this works. How do you get it clean? How do you, and to your point, you started this saying literally you have countries that we are at war with on purpose injecting problematic software into these places. And you just said some of this software is going into places like outer space, like places where we really don't want there to be a mistake. So it's pretty critical that this software is safe and not laden with a bunch of problematic code. How do you safeguard it?
Yeah, we have a lot of automation for this, and it's a business of edge cases, so there's no single answer, right? But we have tons and tons of automation, and we keep building more and more automation to do this. And then we also have a team of people manually doing these checks and work and patching and builds for the areas our automation can't handle. And we keep giving them more and more work to do as we keep growing and scaling all the software we have, and then we also keep giving them better and better tools to do that work in. But it starts at the very beginning. It starts by getting the source code, the very rawest source code, and the source code for all of the dependencies of that kind of thing, and checking it, running it through a process, patching everything that we find in it after we scan it, getting that built, figuring out how to build it, and then reassembling everything back together again in the end and handing that to our customers. We call that part of it the software factory that we built, and it's a lot of work every time we have to hook that up to the automation and hook that up into our factory so the automation can take over. And then there's automation that finds places the automation couldn't fix something and escalates that to the team, and the team manually does that work, but then figures out how the automation could handle that kind of thing in the future.
That's amazing. Dan, over the last couple of years, you guys have expanded beyond containers into libraries, OS packages, and more recently into workflows and agent-related products. Just announced this year in 2026. How have you thought about your own product expansion? And then let's touch on agentic workflows
Yeah,
and what that's going to look like.
we're 14 minutes in and we're finally talking about AI. Yeah, that's got to
Yeah.
be a record.
By the way, you're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's probably the most exciting and scariest time to be in software engineering in the history. It's software engineering mostly been the same for the last 30 or 40 years. Different programming languages, different tools, but at the end of the day, people still been writing this stuff by hand. The tools have gotten a little bit better, but there's been no massive step function increase in productivity since the first programming languages came out. And now all of a sudden that is getting flipped on its head, and the entire way we build software and products and ship features and roadmaps and where is your moat and differentiation and all of that is just kind of thrown up in the air, and everyone's trying to figure it out all at the same time. But yeah, we've been able to leverage a lot of this stuff over the past say 18 months really, to accelerate how we're shipping code, letting us do more things safely and securely. So yeah, the business we started with container images, and we spent a whole year trying to use AI to automate it, and nothing worked. And then all of a sudden, like overnight, the models and the harnesses and everything got better, and we've been able to use AI to add more things to the catalog even faster and maintain that software in the catalog even faster. So yeah, we've expanded. We're trying to secure all open source out there, and containers where we started are just one small portion of that. It's one of these things where we would not have been able to build these products or this business the way we were trying to if these tools hadn't gotten there. And thankfully, they kind of did at the exact right time for us.
I want to quickly double click on what you just said, which is like we truly are in a step change function where code was written by a human for the last 30 to 40 plus years. Every improvement was sort of a micro improvement, and now we're actually seeing a true step function change of, I would say, maybe even 2 to 3 happening. What do you think this looks like in 3 to 5 years? What can you see? Um, it would just play it out for us as somebody with the front row seat.
Yeah, 3 to 5 years. Wow, that's a long time frame, especially with the curve and rate of growth going this fast. But I think the next year or two, I think we're going to completely shift the way software is written. The analogy I like to use to explain, the old way, what's happening now, and then where we're going, is woodworking. I've used this story a couple times, but we've been building software by hand. It's like you're doing hand woodworking. You had saws, you had manual drills, all of that kind of thing. And if you've ever done that, it's fun. A lot of people still do hand woodworking.
I have.
It's
It's great.
it's slow. You get to take your time. It's harder to make mistakes.
It's
You understand what's
therapy. It's very therapeutic.
yeah, but it also takes forever.
Yes.
And the kind of agentic tools that came out over the past year, like the cursors and the Claude codes and all of these kind of things. It's like we gave everyone power tools all at the same time. Like now every engineer has a circular saw instead of a hacksaw. It's a lot of fun. You're moving a lot faster. You're going to cut a finger off if you haven't been trained on how to do these things safely. It's a lot more dangerous at the same time, but it's a lot more fun, and we're cutting a lot more wood a lot quicker. But that's also not how more like modern furniture and all of this stuff actually gets built out of wood. And that's sort of where I think in the next year we're going to end up with automated assembly lines and factories and systems that do all of this. People are still going to have those tools around, and they're going to do one-offs here and there and use those to build these automated systems. But that's not how software is going to be created. It's going to go straight from idea to production. In these automated systems that ensure you have quality, that ensure you have security, that ensure it meets the requirements, that ensure the system isn't going to go down in any one of these stages. And the role of a software engineer is going to change. You're going to be operating that factory rather than writing the code or being involved and being in the loop on all of this. It's the first time ever where ideas are finally the bottleneck again. Everyone always used to say ideas are worthless. The only thing that matters is execution. That kind of middle part of building a product, all of that hard execution people had to do in building and shipping, that's getting compressed now. That work is getting a lot cheaper. It's getting a lot faster. And you can build anything you want in a weekend now. And this is still the early days for all of this software.
By the way, it is the early days, and I had fun and literally built an entire platform last weekend just in a few hours, having some fun, banging around. And to your point, ideas will become the bottleneck because the build is not the bottleneck. Um, what is the role of a software engineer in the future in 5 years?
I
Like,
think it's that kind of factory operator role, right? The one of the problems a lot of organizations have now, and we talk to CTOs and people all over, their engineers are using Claude Code and Cursor, and they're spending tons of money on tokens, but the roadmap is still kind of going at the same speed. We're not kind of turning all of that increased code being written into increased product velocity yet.
why is it moving at the same speed, Dan? I wanted to ask you that.
Yeah, and I think it's like there's other bottlenecks here, right? If you write code in your local IDE and press save, that doesn't go right to production. That doesn't go right into users' hands. There's dozens of other steps that happen in between that, and it's just like any other assembly line or optimization problem. It completely eliminated one of the bottlenecks, but it just pushes the bottleneck downstream to somewhere else. And that's the kind of thing that organizations have to figure out. That you have to get to that spot where, like, when an engineer presses save and when they merge a commit, it goes straight to production confidently. And until that happens, yeah, the bottleneck is just kind of moved, and you've got so much code you can't ship it all. Turning that shipping speed and iteration speed and being able to deliver features to your customers quickly is the next part of that bottleneck. It's like the old days of, like, on-prem software. Companies used to, my first job was at Microsoft, and I worked on an on-prem CRM system, and they shipped every 3 years on DVDs. It didn't matter how much stuff you shipped; it wasn't getting into customers' hands until they burned the next set of DVDs. And then everyone figured out SaaS was a lot better for a bunch of reasons, but one of them is you could add new features to a website every single day. Every time someone hits refresh, you can get value out a lot quicker. That's a similar analogy, I think, to what the industry has to figure out coming up soon.
You said basically software engineers now become the factory managers of the factory.
Yeah.
Um, do you think that means more software engineers in the future? Less? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it depends which type of business you're in, right? I think basic economics says, like, if a resource gets a lot more valuable, you want a lot more of that, not a lot fewer, until ideas really truly become the bottleneck and you can't think of things to have them go and do anymore at the same speed that they can do it. If you're in a profit center, if you're in some company building new things and selling them, then yeah, I think we're going to want a lot more engineers. I think we're going to have to change the way we manage them, and the org charts are going to have to get redesigned and all of that. But I think, yeah, there's going to be an increased demand for these people. But if you're in a cost center and, yeah, you're building internal automation or something like that, you can probably do that with a team of 2 instead of a team of 20 before, like you were doing before. But the demand on the other side hopefully keeps outpacing it.
Hypothetical question. Let's say today you have a child. Would you want them to be a software engineer in the future?
I get asked this one a lot. I'm like, what else would you do? It's a scary time. It's a scary field. But yeah, creating digital products, yes, I think that's always going to be around.
Okay, that was what I was getting at. Um, talk a little bit, right? You touched on something where you're like org charts are going to have to change and
Yeah.
how you think about that. What you're basically saying is we are going to have extreme velocity of code.
Mhm.
Um, it and I'll get to where ChainGuard sits in the future in 3 to 5 years. And I know 3 to 5 years is hard to think about, but I feel like we have to. I think we have to zoom out and get a sense of like where is this wave taking us. Um, but basically, what you're saying is we are going to be able to solve more problems than we ever have. The digital surface area that we can build is going to get cheaper, faster, easier, cheaper, faster, easier. More and more people are going to be empowered to be able to do it. Um, but org charts are going to have to
Yeah.
change a bit. And say more about what do you see when you say that?
Yeah, we've been trying some things internally. We haven't gone full Jack Dorsey, flip over the company, invert everything mode. But yeah, I think one of the obvious ones, the industry standard wisdom for running engineering teams for the last 20 years comes out of the mythical Man Month. This book that was written back in the 80s. It kind of settles in on 2 pizza teams, like Amazon has done it, right? Every team is somewhere around 8 people, and instead of growing the team, you add more 8-person teams under a manager and set things up that way. Um, One of the formulas in Mythical Man Month kind of shows that whole diminishing returns as teams and orgs scale. There's communication overhead. The bigger an organization is, the more people you have to talk to, the more communication has to happen, and that goes up, exponentially with the amount of people in the org. And so that's sort of where that 8-person sweet spot comes in. With these new tools, if every engineer gets, say 25% more productive, which I think is an underestimate, That team of 8 now shrinks to a team of 4. Half of it is because people are going faster, and then half of that is because there's fewer people to have to talk to and coordinate with. You then start to run into other issues like people take vacations, you need on calls and everything. So I don't know how much below 4 you can really shrink things to before other people issues start to come up. But we started doing that yet. Instead of a team of 8, as we build new things, we start with a team of 4. But then, how do you organize those teams of 4 to make sure they're not all doing the same thing or doing opposite things and everything? So you start to get different problems as you try to figure out the right way to ship quickly in this new world.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Where do you think Chainguard sits in this future in 5 years? Are you the safety store that becomes literally a layer of the entire internet as we build?
Yeah, I hope that, in that time, I hope we have every type of open source software out there. And I hope we are the place everyone comes to get that open source software. We sit in this critical gap between the people writing it in that source code form and the way enterprises actually build and rely and run on it. And there's a lot of work there that, these people just aren't going to do. You're not paying them to do it. They don't want to do it. And they especially don't want to do it in the way the enterprises want them to do it. And as we keep getting bigger and faster, I hope that we start to cover all of it. Today we probably only cover somewhere between 5 and 6% of all of the open source software out there. When you look at all the different form factors and ways that it's built and ways that it's consumed, I hope we're a one-stop shop for all open source software, every programming language, every form factor. And there's new ones too all the time, right? You mentioned some of the new AI stuff we're doing. There's agent skills, there's new frameworks, there's new orchestration systems. And that's going to keep changing very quickly. Everyone always wonders when we're going to have the first programming language just designed for agents. I hope we're there and building all of that stuff as quickly as people are trying to use it.
That's well said. As we think a little bit about your contrarian view on this future, what do you maybe believe that others don't right now?
Everyone has a lot of different opinions, so it's hard to come up with one that everyone disagrees with. But yeah, I think the models are already good enough to do the work of most engineering teams, and I think not everyone has realized that piece yet. Some have, so I don't know if this is something that everyone disagrees with me on. But I posted a while ago, like Claude Opus 4.6. I don't know if I would call it AGI, but it also kind of is at the same time. Like I don't know that we can tell anymore. We don't need to wait for another wave of models out there to really put these things into production, get work done safely, and ship correctly. A year ago, that wasn't true. And I think a lot of people, if they're not actually trying this and staying at the forefront every day, every week, every month, you can kind of get fatigued. And 6 months ago, it wasn't that good. You might have some brilliant moments and then a bunch of terrible ones. But in the last 3 months, things have changed dramatically, and I don't think we actually need them to get any better to do everything we need to be doing in the software industry. And they are going to get better, and that's the crazy part.
I'm going to just play that back. Effectively, what you're saying is like we are near AGI already, and actually, you can't even necessarily fathom things that we are currently not capable of doing.
Yeah, for in the software space, the models are, they're there.
That's incredible. That's like a real moment just to soak that in. Um, yeah, I mean Dan, that's really well said.
When 5.0 or whatever comes out, I'm sure I'll use it, but I don't know that I need it.
Um, I, let's shift a little bit to security because there is actually, I sit here as someone running a venture fund, and just every day worrying about the exponential number of ways that security is getting worse. And actually, so that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, which is, what do most companies fundamentally misunderstand about software security today? So if you were talking to all your customers today, and we've had many CISOs say to us, this agentic software is happening and it's happening in our orbit right now, and we actually don't have our arms around it. Just give a sense of like what worries you that you would want to say to everybody.
Yeah, there's probably a couple different angles to take this one from, but I think you touched on it right there at the end. This is the first, massive technical change movement like this where security teams are not allowed to say no. Everyone understands how important this is, and they need to find a path to yes. And if they're too slow, it's happening anyway, without them being in the loop. They're not allowed to say no to this, even if it is dramatically adding risk, dramatically, putting a company at risk of violating trust, getting hacked, all of these things. And they have to figure it out quickly. And on this exponential slope that we're on, if a security team is, say, 3 months behind what engineering is doing, that 3 months is getting much, much, much bigger every month that passes.
It's like 3 years.
That
Yeah.
3 months today is like 3 years a year from now. And it's a very scary challenge for them. The attack surface is increasing. The more code gets written, people that don't know how to write code are writing code inside of companies, and uh, they have to figure this out quickly. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. But what I think here is, like, I don't actually worry about it inside of software as much. A lot of people are very concerned about vibe coding and things like this inside of software teams. The software industry is already pretty good at all of this, right? You can take an intern off the street at most companies and have them shipping production code. The models are already better than interns, right? If we have guardrails, we have code review, we have tests, we have all this kind of process in place. The part where I think you have to be worried is when other orgs start writing their own to do their own things, and they don't have all of that culture and all of that process baked in. If you have a finance team that builds some new app to do payroll next week, you don't have unit tests or code review for payroll, and that's the area where I think there's a lot of risk, and the organizations aren't really well equipped to deal with it today.
Dan, important. What you basically just said is CISOs can't afford to say no, because each month is actually, it's 3 months. It's a year is 3 years of their organization being behind on what's possible. Again, so it's basically a race for relevance inside these companies. Um, Obviously there's different types of companies, right? And I sold LearnBest to Northwestern Mutual, a big regulated company. So in healthcare, in financial services, places where they're regulated businesses for a reason, because the gaps of what could go wrong actually are severe and have real consequences. Um, do you feel like if you're like a big financial service firm, is the safer thing to wait and see and actually because breaches can be so dangerous? How do you think a little bit about the moral hazard decision of CISOs right now in different types of companies?
Yeah, I I'm a little surprised that you don't see that a real change there in adoption between the most heavily regulated companies out there and startups.
Wow.
Yeah, they all get it. The CIOs of the biggest banks out there are telling their teams to get on board here, because they're not one of their competitors will. There's one of the largest, oldest banks in the U.S. has agents inside of their org chart as employees.
Yep. Yep.
They're really leaning in here. Most technical shifts, yeah, you see the laggards, the basic kind of crossing the chasm curve. That's all compressed. Even the people that are going slow are like 2 months behind, not 6 years behind, like they would normally be with a technology rollout. And they're depending on everyone else to figure out how to do it safely, but they have to be able to ingest that very quickly too, that knowledge and those practices. We had a customer conference a month or so ago, and I asked everyone, like, raise your hand if you're using AI. Everyone in the room, their hand goes up. Raise your hand if your security team is happy about it. About a quarter of the hands stayed up. Raise your hand if your security teams are using AI. Even fewer hands went up. And I think that's the scary part of all of this. If the security teams can't get on board as quickly, that gap, that 1 month turns into 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really well said, Dan. I see that perfectly. If you think about the hardest trade-offs that you've had to make at ChainGuard, and ultimately, let's just state it, ChainGuard is the solution to a lot of these problems, which is that you give people a chance to scale as a muscle, because you're doing a lot of the security work for people. Talk a little bit about the biggest trade-offs you've had to make. You've gone, again, in under 5 years to a 3.5 billion plus in growing company, securing hundreds, now 600 plus companies. What has been your biggest trade-off?
It's always about focus and making sure that we're not spreading ourselves too thin and too much, and then making sure that we're doing enough as we grow and we don't miss some of these opportunities at the same time. And as we get bigger, these things take a lot longer to do, right? It's not just shipping stuff; it's aligning marketing and sales teams and the entire go-to-market around everything that we're doing, and that takes a while. And so you can't just keep pivoting every single day, at this scale like you could when you're 10 people. And so you really have to figure out where we think the world is going to be a year, 18 months from now, and make sure we're building toward that. But then constantly be adjusting that and constantly making these changes, because you don't feel the mistakes today anymore. You feel them 2 years from now. All of the stuff that is going wrong inside of the company today, we can look back and it's, yeah, we didn't do the right thing to fix that a year ago. And now to fix it, we have to wait another year to really fix things.
If you're an individual right now, should we be thinking about our security differently?
As an individual,
Yeah, as an individual, meaning there's just more risk,
yeah.
right? And what you basically just said, to simplify it, is that competition wins.
Hmm.
It always wins.
Hmm.
Every big company is hyper competitive and
Yeah.
needs to stay at the pace of the effective AGI that we now have. The surface area for gaps is growing. Chainguard is helping us close it.
Hmm.
But effectively, that does mean, sort of my expectation is we're going to see some really large breaches. We're going to see some companies, probably the ones not using Chainguard, that have really seismic breaches of some kind that were unexpected. And I think we'll probably have some big CISO stories where things go wrong, um, because they're not necessarily set up to keep pace.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, do you think about your own personal security different? And I don't mean physical security, like someone on the street. I mean your digital security differently. Or do you have
Well,
any practices that you don't do that we should all know of things that you wouldn't, do on the internet?
yeah, I think there's one more element in there when you talk about all these breaches and the security gaps, and it's the fact that this is a multiplayer game, security, right? It's not like you're building a bridge and you want to make sure the bridge doesn't fall down, right? Like we know how to do that. This is a multiplayer game where there are attackers out there constantly trying new things, and they're using this technology too. And so at the same time that every CISO is dealing with their surface area getting a lot bigger, they're also dealing with the APTs, the advanced persistent threats out there, also getting incredibly more
Seriously.
sophisticated capabilities. Yet the only real bottleneck in the past, everyone knows that a North Korea out there could break into any system given enough time, right? There's no such thing as perfect security. The only real bottleneck was patience and time on their side because they don't have infinite people willing to hack infinite systems over years. But that bottleneck is getting reduced. And so, yeah, you're completely right. There are going to be breaches. And a lot of these breaches are going to be at no fault of the companies. They're doing everything they possibly could have done, but attackers are now 10 or 100 times as capable too. As an individual, do all those things that you're supposed to do, but probably put off, right? Actually set up two-factor authentication everywhere. Turn off the SMS ones on your phone. That kind of thing. But yeah, it's just going to happen, and we have to kind of deal with it. And it's because the attackers are allowed to do this, and there are very little repercussions at a nation state level.
Two-factor authentication, everybody, everywhere. Do it. Do it
That's the
today.
best thing you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the best thing you can do. One more question, just a little bit about the future is, if you're right about everything you're saying about what software development looks like, first of all, that's a pretty exciting world, which is you said something quite bright in there, which
And
is,
scary. Yeah.
yeah, well, we can solve a lot more problems, which is exciting. What disappears in the future in your mind? What goes away?
Yeah. Ooh, what actually disappears? When you look across industries too, just outside of software, right? I like to use a couple analogies. Doctors, right? I think doctors can have immense benefits from AI and these tools. They can pattern match across more cases than any one person could possibly keep in their heads. But the thing is with doctors, if doctors get better, you need fewer doctors, not more, because they're preventing things earlier and keeping people healthier longer, where you don't have to go to the doctor as often. There won't be zero, but assuming this future and you can get some AI scan of every single body signal and get preventive and corrective treatments and medications early, that's great for the world. But it also means probably fewer doctors. But the complete opposite side of that, from a cynical view, I think is lawyers. If lawyers get a lot more effective, we all need more lawyers, not fewer lawyers. There's going to be a lot more lawsuits and everything like that, just because it's cheaper to do all of this work and file it. So between like the businesses that you get better, they both get better, but they get better in different ways.
That's so interesting. And actually, um, I don't know that we want a world with a lot more lawsuits. But here we are. Um,
We'll have AI judges to handle all of these lawsuits.
um, Dan, just given that you really are at the forefront of watching this entire wave evolve, what is a belief that you held early that you've completely changed your mind on?
One of these that I was completely wrong on was how fast AI was going to make its way into these regulated industries. It still shocks me to this day. I thought we had a couple of years of people, playing with this stuff before we were putting real production sensitive workloads in it. That completely shocked me. I was wrong. We didn't get that window, which is scary for a lot of reasons. Normally, you get some time as we move along that kind of, crossing the chasm style curve for these systems to get hardened and to figure out the rough edges before they really need to be put in healthcare and in banking and in defense systems. We didn't get that chance here, and so now we're playing catch up.
Actually, on that same point, I with Claude in the last little while not releasing Mythos. How do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's the responsible move. I get it, but it's limited the time. Someone else is going to get these capabilities very soon. It's this crazy arms race where there's labs all over the world, all building these same things. But it is the responsible way to do it. Give it to people to defend first before you go give a tool to everyone that can now hack any system out there. That 2 to 3 month window is great, but that 2 to 3 month window is going to be gone very quickly too. And we've got to figure it out. So telling everyone this is coming and doing this in this rollout, I think it's great. It's smart. It's also great press for them, all of that. But yeah, they're not the ones controlling AI across the entire world, and not everyone is going to be as responsible as they are.
I want to double click on responsibility right now because I think we actually all feel it. I all literally can feel that we are on the edge of something that will unleash greatness, and as you just said, is also really scary. What scares you,
um,
and what do we do about it?
yeah, I mean, nothing here really like it's more exhilarating, I guess, rather than scary is the right thing, the right way to put it. I don't really know or believe in this like super sentient thing that's going to destroy humanity. I hope I'm wrong. But or I hope I'm
You
right.
do.
Sorry, yeah. I hope I'm right.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong, it's too late. We can't really fix it anyway. So we'll just, be nice to the robots. I always say thank you to the Waymos after I get out. I hope they remember that when they take over.
By the way, I do too. I say thank you. I'm like appreciate you, and then I'm like, oh my god, no, and I'm like I just wasted compute. Okay, here we are.
Yeah, so I don't really buy that one coming, but yeah, the rest of this, it's people doing bad things with incredibly effective tooling, I think is what we have to worry about.
I've read a number of books that can paint how those edge cases that could be profound.
They tell me this is how the world ends, that one.
Yeah,
Great book, yeah.
what a great book. Um, I One more question before we go to the quick fire round, which is, in so many ways, you are really playing offense to security, in what you're doing, and really trying to empower a world where we can leverage these incredible technologies safely. Um, right now, in every company, it's engineering and then security is over here, right? It's like this separate function that then like looks at everything and assesses risks. And uh, how does that evolve? Is it just part of engineering going forward and it should never be a separate function? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's already done that in a lot of organizations, right? There's always going to be a central security function because there's things outside of engineering that need security too. There's physical security, there's IT security, there's all sorts of other types of security that still matter and aren't really core to engineering. If you're a company that has no engineering team and doesn't build software, you still need a security team. So I think that part kind of stays the same, but for product security and application security and security for software itself, I think most organizations already realize that. You hear the whole shift left buzzword a lot, and I think it's really like catch up left, because cloud providers and modern DevOps put a lot more control into engineers' hands than they ever had before. You used to have to file a ticket if you wanted a new server to deploy something onto, and have some operations team install the packages and everything you needed on that server. Making the cloud programmable, put that in the hands of every engineer. You can now spin up whatever you need just with a CLI, which is great. Engineers can now do everything they need to. They're not blocked. But security teams sitting at the end no longer had that natural gating function. And so they figured out that if they wanted to be involved in the security of the products, they couldn't wait until they were about to ship and go look at the security of those products. They were shipping before it got to that point. So that shift left was really a run left to where those decisions were actually being made. So I think inside of that, most organizations have already moved to that space, and I think it's the right one.
That's great, and I agree with you. Dan, I want to move to a quick fire round. I'm just going to ask a question. You give us the first thought that comes to your mind. Um, what is a book that shaped you? A book that you would recommend people read?
One of the last ones that I just got a ton out of, and I keep going back through it, is Qualified Sales Leader. It's so good for explaining how enterprise sales works to someone that knows nothing about how enterprise sales works. Something else though I read every day that's incredible. It's not a book though. It's Matt Levine's newsletter. It's about financial systems and markets and all this, but he covers everything. And like, yeah, I didn't know how any of this stuff worked, and he does just a great job of explaining it.
Thanks for paying that forward to everybody. Um, what is a mantra that you think kind of defines how you move through the world?
Yeah.
I always say we kind of have, I feel like a lot of us have something that kind of runs through the back of our head. What's yours?
Yeah, we have a couple inside of the company. One that we use to try to explain the work that we do. It's this shit is hard, and we're doing hard work and stuff that not everyone wants to be doing, and that's how we explain the
It should be.
value that we give. Yeah, I have one of these little things printed out on my desk, but that's probably the biggest one we talk about all the time. As we do hard and annoying things and pass that value on to our customers.
Um, by the way, that is the mantra I want you to have, which is you're taking the hard stuff off our plate. So thank you. Um, who's someone you admire? And I don't mean like a family member. I mean somebody moving through this world that you're grateful for, and why?
I love our investors. I talk to them all the time. A lot of people talk about strange founder dynamics and board management and all of this stuff, but maybe we got incredibly lucky or what. But I trust all of our investors in the cap table. I talk to them almost as often as I talk to everyone inside of the company. It's great, and I would really recommend any founders, anyone out there, to try to have that relationship with their investors.
I
It,
think
it
that
makes
would
it just
change
a lot easier.
it makes life a lot easier. I couldn't agree with you more. Um, what's an underrated risk in software today?
I'd probably flip it a bit, and the biggest risk that I worry about in software is non-software teams now being software teams, and not knowing what that means and not knowing how to do that safely. So yeah, I think the risk is now everyone is a software engineer, whether they know it or not.
No, I'm a software engineer.
Yeah.
I deeply appreciate that point. Um, what's your best tip of how you're using AI in your personal life where you just like, wow, that's better? What is that?
Um, in my personal life, um, the same as my professional life, honestly. Like reading, planning, writing, thinking about things. I use it not like I'm not one of these people that got addicted to GPT 4.0 and had a codependency or anything on it, which was kind of terrifying. But yeah, like a thought partner. I just dump in ideas, dump in notes all the time, whether it's about personal stuff or work stuff. Using the memory feature to recall all of these conversations, give me advice, researching things I'm going to buy, kind of all of this. The ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude UIs really have replaced search engines for me.
Similarly, I really do use it as a thought partner. And there's like no topic that it's not a thought partner on. It's a thought partner as an investor for research. It's a thought partner as a mom. The number of times it's saved me a doctor's visit is actually wild. But I agree with that. Last
Yeah.
thing is, what's a pinch me moment? You know, you're so it's in so many ways you've accomplished so much in such a short period of time. But what is a moment that kind of you got home from work and were like, I can't believe that we did that? What was it?
The coolest one for me is always just like I post a ton on LinkedIn, and I never think about them. I just write stuff and it's hard to like kind of see that audience. It's not the same as Twitter where everything blows up completely. But like one of the coolest things for me is always just when I run into someone at a conference that like I've never met, didn't even know it was around, and like they tell me they've been reading all this stuff I posted, and it's like that's always just sort of a wake up moment. That, like people actually read these things. Um,
I will say it is nice to see the community that you
yeah,
can build of people who are interested in the same topics you're interested
yeah.
in. Well, Dan, first of all, thank you so much. We are rooting for you. As someone who was chief digital officer at a Fortune 50 company myself, I so appreciate what you're doing. I understand the problem, and I also really look forward to a world that feels like it can take advantage of these advancements, but actually do it in a way where we don't have massive attacks that create and wreak havoc on humanity. So we're rooting for you. Keep up the incredible work. Thank you so much for your time today, and best of luck.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you all so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate, review, subscribe. We'll be back again with another episode of Inspired with Alex Von Tobel. Thank you.